invite you to travel with me this morning in your minds back to Israel. There's a place where a flat plain lies between two hills, and this plain is about the size of a football field. And it's believed to be the place where David and Goliath had their battle. You can visit there today if you were to go there. The Bible calls it the Valley of Elah. You see, Israel was at war with the Philistines, and the two armies gathered on opposite sides of that plain. On one hill was the army of Israel, and the other was the army of the Philistines. And the Philistines had this guy named Goliath. Our text, which is, by the way, 1 Samuel 17, I encourage you to turn there with me. Our text says his height was about 10 feet. And he probably weighed somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 to 500 pounds. He had a bronze helmet. And he wore a coat of scale armor, also made of bronze. And that coat weighed somewhere in the neighborhood of 125 pounds. And it was made up of hundreds of overlapping bronze scales, covered his arms and reached all the way to his knees. He wore bronze shin guards. The Bible calls them greaves. And he had a bronze javelin. His spear shaft, the Bible says, was like a weaver's rod, long and thick. And its iron point weighed about 15 pounds. That's all from verses 4 through 7 of 1 Samuel 17. Now, as the two armies were gathered there on opposite sides of the plains for 40 days, verse 16 tells us, Goliath stood on the plain and roared loud enough to be heard by everyone. This day I defy the armies of Israel. Choose a man and have him come down to me, and if he's able to kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. Give me a man and let us fight each other. And on hearing the Philistines' words, King Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified, it says in verse 11. In fact, they all fled from him in great fear. Now one would think that since Saul was the king, and 1 Samuel 1:9 describes him as a head taller than anyone else, it would have been him who would have stepped up and been willing to take on Goliath, but there he was, cowering in his tent like all of his soldiers. You see, by this time, King Saul's relationship with God had deteriorated to the point where God rejected him as king. He was still serving, but God had taken his hand off of him. That's 1 Samuel 15. Meanwhile, they do this in the old westerns. You go through and you set the scene, and then you see at the bottom. Meanwhile, a man named Jesse lived in Bethlehem with his sons. Jesse's three oldest sons were in King Saul's army, but verses 12 through 15 tell us David, the youngest, was at home tending his father's sheep. Now, by the time that all of this was taking place, the prophet Samuel had already anointed David as the next king of Israel. But his time to lead had not yet come. And so he was at home while his brothers went off to war. After this went on for about 6 weeks with no word from his sons, Jesse, being a good father, was rightfully concerned about their welfare. And so he sent David to the Valley of Elah with supplies for them, as well as a gift for their commander. That's verses 17 through 20. David arrived at the valley just in time to hear Goliath's daily challenge. And it angered young David. It angered him that this Philistine was going unchallenged. And so he said, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And then he asked, done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? And he was told in verse 25, the king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel. Now, David must have expressed some kind of willingness to take on Goliath, because what David said was overheard, our text says. And it was reported to King Saul, and Saul sent for him. Now Saul knew David, at least knew of him, because, as we said, he had drifted by this time. And 1 Samuel 16 tells us that he was tormented by an evil spirit. And whenever the evil spirit came on Saul, they would bring in David and he would play his lyre. And the relief would come to Saul and he would feel better. And the evil spirit would leave him. So there was some familiarity there. Now, there in the valley of Elah, being brought to Saul with Goliath bellowing in the valley, David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. I will go and fight him. That's verse 32. Now, Saul was certainly not convinced that David was up to the challenge. But there was no one else volunteering. So Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. But when David tried walking around, he said, I cannot go in these because I'm not used to them. So he took them off. Now, that's where we take up with our reading this morning. And I hope that you turn with me to the book of 1 Samuel 17. And we begin reading with verse 40. Then he took a staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine with his shield bearer in front of him kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was a little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. David said to the Philistine, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he swung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran, David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Now, if you were watching from the hill that day in the valley of Elah, you would have seen this enormous, monstrous, battle-tested giant walking toward this little, scrawny, unarmed boy. And you might have thought to yourself, that boy's going to die. Goliath certainly thought so. He did what a lot of bullies do. He talked a lot of trash. He said, am I a dog? You said, come after me with sticks? And basically, come here, boy, and I'll feed you to the ends. Now, David could have wilted in the face of such odds, but he talked his own trash back. And in fact, he ran quickly toward Goliath. Now, this was not foolishness or false bravado. This was strategy. The giant wasn't going away. And David's choice was this. He could overcome the giant or be destroyed by it. Same choice you and I face when we're dealing with the trials and tests of life. We can overcome the giant in the power and strength of our God, or we can be destroyed by it. You see, David was getting to within range, and he was determined to face the giant on his own terms. When he was in range, his stone found the mark. And I know there may be some skeptics, lest anyone think that this is just a Sunday school story and that this type of victory would have been impossible. Judges 20:16 tells us that there were lots of slingers in Israel. And they could unleash a stone and hit a target a hair's breadth at 200 yards. It was common. David's shot was not that exceptional. And in fact, multiple modern ballistic experts tell us that a typical size stone hurled in this fashion by a skilled man could reach speeds of about 90 miles an hour. So picture yourself standing at home plate in a Major League Baseball stadium, no glove, no catcher's gear, and allowing, let's just say Justin Verlander to uncork one right at your head. He would kill you. And that's exactly what happened to Goliath. It is absolutely plausible. And it was something that David did. But you see, David won the day, and he held Goliath's head aloft in celebration because he had overcome a tremendous challenge. Now, he did it in faith. He gave God the glory. He told Goliath, I'm not coming at you with weapons or skills. I'm coming at you in the power of God. But what about us? We all face our giants in this life, don't we? Some of you are facing them right now. The trials and obstacles that come our way, in which overcoming seems impossible, but we have no choice, for if we do not overcome our giants, they will crush us and destroy us. Financial struggles, broken relationships, job issues, the grief of losing a loved one, depression and anxiety, critical health issues, a whole variety of life circumstances, the habits and choices that dog us. You know what I'm speaking of. Every one of us here has our personal giants. And we all want to be overcomers. We want to live in Christ. We want to bring God glory. And we want to beat the giant. Cut its head off. But how do we face down our giants? Well, we look to David's example. And first of all, and there are R's throughout this outline if you're taking notes, refuse. Refuse to be discouraged. Now, there's no denying the fact that the odds were against David. He's just a scrawny kid, probably a teenager. And Goliath saw him as, to quote the text, little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome. He was this skinny, good-looking, probably teenage boy. And even Saul told him, you're not going to be able to fight the giants. You're only a young man, and he's been a warrior since his youth. But David did not enter this fight on his own skill or strength. He told Goliath, you come against me with a sword and javelin and spear. He didn't say this, but he probably thought it. And you're huge. On the surface, there's no way I can win this battle. And that is as it is with us. Some of those giants that you're facing, you look at them and go, there's no way I can beat this. And you're right. There's no way in and yourself based on your own strength and skills and your own resolve that you can beat your giant. But that's not how David came. He said, I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty. And this day he will deliver you into my hands. I'm going to cut off your head, and the animals are going to feast on your carcass. That's some serious trash talk. But David was coming at it from a faith perspective, and I know we all get discouraged. It would be foolish for me to stand in front of you today and say, don't get discouraged. I'm saying refuse to get discouraged. There's an element of determination here. There's an element of choice. We all get discouraged when the bad time comes. It hits us. And immediately, one of the first things we feel is fear and dread and discouragement. But if we allow the discouragement to overrun us, we've already lost. And so we have to collect ourselves in faith and say, okay, I see this. I can look at my giant. I know what's going on. And I refuse, because I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and I put my faith and hope in Him, I refuse to be discouraged no matter what I see in front of me. Now, this will not be easy, because that voice in our head whispers, all is lost. Just give up. Go back to bed, curl up, cover your head with the cover, and just give in. Let it go. So our only recourse against the giants we face is to refuse to be discouraged in faith. Now, this is not stubbornness. This is not denial. Neither of those work. In fact, both of those set you up for defeat. If I deny my giants right there in front of me, what's going to happen? I'm going to be destroyed. Because it is, in fact, right there in front of me. This is faith, my friends. Confident in what we hope for. And assurance about what we do not see. That's why Paul wrote in Romans 8. If God is for us, who can be against us? Now, when your giant shows up in whatever form it may come, personalize that. And say to yourself, you know, David talked to himself all the time throughout the Psalms. Why, my soul, are you downcast? He's talking to himself. You and I can do the same thing. We used to make fun of people that talk to themselves. We thought that was a little foolish. But you know what? If that's what it takes, talk to yourself. Hey, me, if God is for me, who can be against me? Who can stand against me in the face of faith in Jesus Christ? I do not go in my own strength. I go in His. And I refuse to be discouraged. As followers of Jesus Christ, you and I are people of faith and hope, grounded in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Therefore, we will refuse to be discouraged, even against the giant. Second, realign. Realign your focus. Now, I've already told you that David's shot was certainly possible, but we have to acknowledge this. That's not a shot I could have made. Some of you might have made that shot with your rifle out on the deer hunting forest or something like that. Some of you are good at that kind of thing. I'm not. So I have to acknowledge that while David's shot was possible, it was exceptional. You see, David had to have laser focus to pull it off. And missing was not an option. To miss the giant with his one shot would have probably ended the battle, and David would have been destroyed. See, that's why he moved in so close. He ran toward the giant. He needed to zero in on the target, and he needed to make this shot. Sometimes when a giant comes into our lives, we get one shot. And we have to make it. Now, that's going to require faith. We don't do that on our own. Now, while David's aim was on Goliath, his focus was on God. And that's an important distinction. skills. He might have been able to spin the sling and conk Goliath on the head, but would it have won the battle the way it did? Would it have dropped the giant? Maybe not. But in faith, in the power and strength of the Lord, different story. So when you and I choose to engage our giants, we must be very careful to keep our focus on Jesus. Now, in the midst of a crisis, because you and I are human, our focus will, for a moment, let's be honest, Jesus is the last thing on our mind when the crisis first hits. And then we correct, don't we? We realign. Hopefully, very quickly, we go, oh, wait a minute. I need to look at this through the lens of faith. Now, that's going to require realignment once we get over the initial shock of, here stands my giant. Focusing on the problem is only going to distract us. We need to focus on overcoming the problem. You ever notice there are a lot of people in life that are really good at pointing out problems without giving any feasible solutions whatsoever. You and I, if we're going to be overcomers, just simply saying, that's my giant, is not enough. We must focus on overcoming the giant. If your giant is wearing you down, remember, Jesus invites you to come to me. All of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I'll give you rest. So take my yoke upon you and learn from me, because I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. If your giant makes you afraid, remember the words of Jesus from Luke 12. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. And if your giant makes you feel isolated and alone, like you're the only one who's ever had to deal with this in the history of all humanity, remember what Jesus said, I am with you always, to the very end of this age. Always remember Peter, who was overcoming a great obstacle one night on a stormy sea. He's walking on the water toward Jesus. And let's give Peter his props. He's the only one of those guys in the boat that had the nerve to step out. That's amazing. And the scriptural account in Matthew doesn't tell us how far he went, but he went farther than I ever have. He took at least some steps on the water. And he was doing great. He was winning this battle. Until he took his focus off Jesus and put it on the wind and the waves and the darkness and the depth of the sea. As long as Peter kept his focus on Jesus, he was fine. As long as David kept his focus on God in faith, giant is going down. As followers of Jesus Christ, you and I are people of faith and hope that is grounded in his resurrection. Therefore, we keep our focus on him. Even if we have to realign it after the initial crisis, whenever we face a giant, we focus on him. Third, remember. Remember God's faithfulness. While everyone else saw David's shortcomings, David remembered God's faithfulness. He told this to King Saul. David remembered those times in his past when he was up against it and God came through. Verses 34 through 37. When a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them. Why? Because he's denied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine. David is not bragging. David probably knew there's no way he could kill a lion. Remember, he's a scrawny kid. And yet, There had been times in his life where God performed amazing, powerful miracles. And David is remembering those. He's going back over his list. All of us have lists. Now I know God is always faithful. We believe that, don't we? We tell ourselves that. We say that to ourselves a lot. But when you're standing before a giant, getting ready to turn loose your stone, it has to be personalized. You and I need to go back over those times when God has come through. Those times when He has blessed us. Those times when He has done something in our lives that only He can do. Years later, throughout the Psalms, David acknowledged this. Psalm 36, he says, "Your love, O Lord, reaches to the heavens, your faithfulness to the skies." Psalm 100, he wrote, "The Lord is good, and His love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all the generations." And in Psalm 138, "I will bow down toward your holy temple and praise your name for your unfailing love and your faithfulness." I have no doubt that when David wrote those words, he was probably remembering not only Goliath, but he was remembering the carcass of that lion and the carcass of the bear and numerous other times where God had intervened and come through in great power and strength. Those of us who follow Jesus need to have good memories. Now, I know that's a challenge for some of us. We forget things all the time. But we're talking here about spiritual memory. It's one thing to acknowledge God is good and He has never, ever failed me. But as I said, we need to make it personal if we're going to deal with giants. So be specific. Keep a list. Do it often in your prayer time. Rehearse those times when God has been faithful, when God has been good. Like the old hymn, which is number 596 in our hymnal, "Count your blessings." Now that seems like kind of a trite thing, and I understand you can't keep a whole list, a comprehensive list of all God's blessings, but in this case, you can most certainly go back over your life and point to times when God has come through. Make that list, my friends. Sit down and make that list soon. Because the next time your giant shows up, you're going to need it. Because in the midst of that crisis, your flesh is going to scream, "This is the time!" And you are the one exception in all of history. God is not going to come through for you. And you need to know better. Because the devil will whisper those lies again and again and again. He will tell you, "Look how big the giant is. Look how well armed and how skilled the giant is. Listen to the trash he's talking." And you're going to need to remember, my God is faithful. See, giants have a way of giving us spiritual amnesia. We get into that crisis and all of a sudden we forget. All the times, the specific times, God has been faithful. And we need to remember. As followers of Jesus Christ, you and I are people of faith and hope, grounded in His resurrection. So remember His faithfulness in your life. Remember it every day, but especially when facing a giant. And then finally, rejoice. Rejoice in victory. Now, it was bloody and grotesque, but David rejoiced in his victory. He was demonstrative in his victory. David took hold of the Philistine sword and drew it from the sheath and cut off his head with his own sword. That's verse 51. And I have no doubt he got this huge giant's head, and he holds it aloft. The head is probably almost bigger than he is. But there's been a great victory that day, and it was time to rejoice. And he held that severed head up in his hand. In fact, verses 54 and 57, which I didn't read to you, David David took the Philistines' head and brought it back to Jerusalem. And as soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner, who was Saul's general, took him and brought him before King Saul, with David still holding the Philistine's head. What a nasty, gross mess that must have been. But David's not turning loose of this trophy. There's been a great victory won. And it's time to rejoice. He's not gloating. He's not seeking adulation. He is celebrating, rejoicing in the victory that God gave him. He's holding that head aloft, in effect saying, look what God did. Now come and rejoice with me. Now what do you suppose Sunday morning worship is for? We gather. I have been in Sunday morning worship thousands of times in my life. Early on, it's because my mom made me. And then over time, it became something that I chose to do. Then it became a vocation. For some of you, it's something you've always done. You like it. We enjoy getting together. And primarily when we gather, we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. Of course, that's the ultimate victory. That's why we celebrate it every Sunday, and we blow the doors off on Easter. Because that is the ultimate victory. And we should do that. That should never diminish. But there's something else in there. What exactly are we celebrating? Do you wonder why, when I became your pastor, I chose to start referring to this gathering as the Sunday morning worship celebration? Well, mostly because of Jesus' victory over death. But also because of all the personal victories God has given us. Not only through the balance of our previous life experience, but also even this past week. What about those times we faced up to a giant and won? Shouldn't we celebrate those victories and invite others to join us? Shouldn't we hold the giant's head aloft? No, don't bring the bloody head. But shouldn't we hold that trophy aloft, not in a bragging way or an egotistical way, but in a way that says to our church family, look what God did. I want you to see the victory that God gave. That's why Paul wrote, rejoice with those who rejoice. But how are we going to do that if we don't share our victories with one another? We should share it. We should get to church on Sunday morning and grab somebody and say, hey, let me tell you what God did for me this week. This is pretty amazing. Nehemiah said in Nehemiah 8, the joy of the Lord is your strength. So not only does God get the glory when we rejoice in victory, but it encourages the rest of us. We love to hear those stories, don't we? We love to hear about the miracles God is doing. We love to hear that somebody we've prayed for has received the answer to their prayer. We love it when God moves on behalf of His people, and we want to hear about it. Now I know, and I respect the fact that many of you are more reserved and you shy away from public demonstrations. I want to say that's the way you're made. And it's okay. If we believe in a Creator, we believe that He has made us the way He has made us. And I know some of you would rather have a root canal than stand before the church and testify. I get that. But you're not left out in this. You see, that's what testimony means. On Sunday morning, during the prayer time, when I say, now we want to give you a chance to share your testimonies and your requests. That's your opportunity to stand and say, God did this week. And let the church rejoice on your behalf. I love it when somebody shares a word of praise and the church applauds. We applaud for some guy scoring a touchdown. We applaud because some guy knows the chords on his guitar. We should applaud when God is moved and blessed one of our own. However, if you struggle with sharing things in front of the whole church, share them with a smaller group of believers. If that's too much, find one person and say, I need to tell somebody what God has done. I need to rejoice in the victory. And I want you to rejoice with me. Do that. When God gives you a victory, you and I need to tell someone. As followers of Jesus Christ, we're people of faith and hope, grounded in His resurrection. So celebrate the victories He gives you. Rejoice in them. Demonstrate it. Yeah, look what God did. Especially when we've defeated a giant. So, I know, this is a sermon that applies to all of us. Some of you have beaten giants in the past. Some of you are dealing with giants right now. And some of you cannot even imagine the giant that is lurking around the corner in your future. See, it applies to all of us. So when you face a giant, whatever it may be, and it's personal to all of us, it's specific to all of us, your giant might not challenge me in the least. Doesn't make me better. Just makes me different. My giant might not even show up on your radar. Remember that when people are dealing with their giants. Don't judge them. Don't step in and say, here's what you need to do. Pray for them. Be there for them. Encourage them. That's the church's role. So when you face a giant, and you will most certainly face a giant, don't be discouraged. Choose not to be. Reject discouragement. Realign your focus on Jesus if it's not already there. Remember the times God has been faithful. And the bloody heads of the giants in your path that He has allowed you to overcome. And when you win, and in Christ you will win,